Traditional stocks don't trade as a multiple to their book value. They trade as a multiple to their earnings. And what I think for most of the Bitcoin treasury companies that are popping up, they understand that one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. So even for people to think about what happens in the bear market, that's the question that everybody's asking.
Bitcoin has reignited a sense of hope in the future for me.
Hello, everybody. Luke Broyles here, and I think you're going to enjoy today's podcast group discussion, featuring a few kind, insightful, and articulate Bitcoin speakers, featuring Mark Moss as well as Natalie Brunell. In today's conversation, you'll see us discuss Bitcoin, Bitcoin's future outlook, Bitcoin Treasury discussions, which are especially applicable given both Natalie and Mark serve on the boards of Bitcoin Treasury companies, as well as myself being in a lot of meetings of these boards. We have that discussion, as well as about why we all believe Bitcoin is going to $1 million, if not more, by the end of the 2020s into the early 2030s, and ultimately why it doesn't even matter. And Bitcoin is about way more than just number go up alone. It's about freedom go up. It's about lifestyle go up. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. I think there's going to be a lot of insight, going to be a lot of knowledge, and hopefully it's going to be fun. But before we begin, I want to hopefully increase your knowledge a little bit with two special insights, let's say, that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of yet, but I think you're going to really appreciate hearing about. The first thing I should mention is that we have various products available now hitting the market. Treasury loan options is something a lot of people want to know is, should I invest in a Bitcoin treasury company? If I wanted to do so, which is the best one? What are the trade-offs with each one? And one of the most important questions Bitcoiners have, if they have personally decided that they want to invest in a Bitcoin treasury company, are the questions surrounding taxes, as well as the questions of where do I get the original capital. This is why I think it's really important to note a 5% interest only, no monthly payment, no ongoing payment, 5% interest only ballooning loan with no margin call, no collateral risk, full self-custodied Bitcoin loan. That's available now. It's something people have been asking me about literally for years now. When are cheap Bitcoin loans going to be out there? This is here now. It is a Bitcoin denominated Bitcoin treasury loan that for those that are looking to invest in Bitcoin treasury companies, it is something that is highly appealing because a 5% interest rate on up to a 5-year term available globally to anyone in the world, with certain qualifications. That is a very intriguing product for people with a substantial amount of Bitcoin that want to get some exposure to Bitcoin treasury companies while being able to defer taxes and not having to have those consequences involved without selling their stack. So if you are somebody that has a substantial amount of Bitcoin, or even if you don't, and you just want to have the conversation, all kinds of options are available. 5% interest only, no margin call, up to 5-year term, 5%. It's the kind of product that is very shocking to people when they first hear about it because it sounds too good to be true. Highly encourage you to learn about it. Highly encourage you to understand the trade-offs because not everybody should use this product, but it is something that a lot of you are going to want to learn about, especially if you want to invest in Bitcoin treasury companies. Follow the information on the screen if you want to learn about that. The second thing I want to tell you about before we enter the conversation here is about the event that we're promoting in accordance with this discussion today, and that is Camp Nakamoto 2025. In addition to Natalie Brunell and Mark Moss today, we have two extra special guests joining us, Angelo and Jeff. These two guys, along with myself, are the three hosts of the upcoming Camp Nakamoto event in October of 2025. We are renting a private island for Bitcoiners, right? People in Bitcoin talk about, oh, we want a Bitcoin citadel, whatever. Well, this is your Bitcoin citadel here in fall of 2025, where there are going to be 150 high signal vetted Bitcoiners on this private island. Many of them are bringing their spouses, their friends, their neighbors, their kids, their parents, whomever it is. This is going to be a really awesome, really intimate, really high signal event. I myself am going to be there, as well as Mark, as well as Natalie and Jeff and Angelo, as well as about a dozen other excellent speakers, many names you would probably recognize, such as Larry Lepard, Dave Foley, and virtual speakers such as James Lowers, Greg Foss, and many, many others yet to announce. But the point is, really, we wanted to create the kind of event that we wanted to go to, not another conference with thousands of people wandering around hotel lobbies and big convention centers. We wanted an intimate, multi-day kind of get-to-know-you event where you're not trying to hand out business cards and get the next quick thing, but you're trying to build real relationships and real connections with people. And as we discussed in today's show, those kinds of networking opportunities are way more valuable than dollars and cents alone. So if you have any interest in attending Camp Nakamoto, highly encourage you to reach out as soon as possible and secure your tickets Because of the 150 slots available on the island, less than 40 are available yet to be claimed. Over 100 of the slots are already spoken for. So there are not a lot of seats left, and the summer is just rapidly flying by. It's hard to believe how quick it is going. But if you have any interest in attending Camp Nakamoto and spending multiple days with myself, Mark, Natalie, and a bunch of other Bitcoiners you recognize, and brand new friends that are also attending that you haven't met yet digitally, highly encourage you to check out Camp Nakamoto. All the information will be given to you as you apply to attend. And so whatever the case, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. I hope these two tidbits of information, the Bitcoin Treasury loans at 5%, as well as Camp Nakamoto coming up here rapidly in October 2025. Hopefully both of those things are insightful to you. Let's get into the conversation without any further delay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the treasuries are the big narrative for sure. I think some bigger new stuff. I mean, we had the passing of those bills last week, right? So the Genius Act, I think, being a big piece of that. DJT Media bought $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. I mean, that's obviously a pretty big bill, or big piece of news that came out to accompany the bill, which I think the connecting those dots is pretty important. So sort of maybe just like the direction and tempo of where Bitcoin is going, just overall, outside of just treasuries alone, I think is maybe a couple of big points.
Mark, can I ask you a question? The Genius Act, I've been reading a lot about it, and there's a school of thought that it's really just a Trojan horse for CBDC. Although they've outlawed the CBDC, they're going to use this as basically a CBDC. Do you have any thoughts on that or anything close to that?
So I think, to understand these things, you have to understand that things can be good and bad at the same time, first of all. So I think there's a lot of good in it, and I think there's a lot of bad. And I'm not a legal, I don't have an legal opinion on this, a regulatory view. But from what I've read, it looks like people are sort of jumping or reaching for straws in a sense where certainly a stable coin could be considered a form of CBDC, except for it's not, right? It's not issued by a central bank, number one, right? But I think the language that got everybody sort of up in odds over this was the fact that they could stop or censor transactions. And so they could sort of control, freeze, block, things like that. And I think that's what people are grabbing onto. I could be wrong. But from what I saw, that's what it was. And so what I would say in regards to that is that's the authority banks have today. They stop and block transactions all the time. I regularly send wires over 6 figures, and every single time I have to fill out a form as to why the wire is going out, right? So banks already do that, and I think they're jumping to conclusions over that as if they were expecting a stable coin to be a decentralized,
Right.
censorship-resistant
That's a
token.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yes, fiat tokens are going to be controlled and be used as a means of control. Yes.
Well, I'm glad I asked you. That makes me feel a lot better. So thank you.
Yeah. I could be wrong. I don't know, Natalie, if you've seen something different. I know you're probably more in the weeds on that than I am.
Well, I find the stablecoin, the Genius Act, to be really interesting because I'm a very big follower of Luke Gromen's analysis and what he talks about with the geopolitical strategy, about how, on the surface, this is about innovation and embracing crypto, but beneath it, really, it's important to extend dollar dominance because we are losing buyers for our debt. And this ensures that these stablecoins are going to be backed by cash and by short-term treasuries. That's very good for us issuing more debt. And then, I think they also need what Luke kind of refers to as an inflation sink to devalue the dollar. Capital, they want it to actually flow into Bitcoin in the same way that they sort of maneuvered things in the 70s with the petrodollar system that they orchestrated. So now we have sort of like a digital assets version of that to create more demand for dollars, which obviously creates more demand for Bitcoin, which is good for us. And maybe Trump's media companies front running buying Bitcoin as a country because we are going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So it's just a lot of interesting things into play at one time.
Awesome.
Yeah, Jeff and Angela, I don't know if you've heard that news yet, but just for everyone watching, at the time we're recording this, the news literally just came out that Trump's media company has bought about $2 billion worth of Bitcoin, or just over $2 billion worth of Bitcoin. So Trump now, since he owns about 60% of the media company, Trump himself personally, at least on paper, owns over 10,000 Bitcoin. That's
almost more. That's almost more than than Coinbase.
It's
And
more than
there's a
Tesla.
lot more dots to be connected in that web,
Yeah.
which we could cover later if you want. But um,
Yeah, what do you guys think? Mark, what do you think about that? I know, both Mark and Natalie, you guys are involved, with treasury companies and all those boards, right? Obviously, Trump's son Eric is involved now with treasury companies, right? So I'm curious what you guys think about that. Why now? Like, why weren't they doing this months ago? I suppose it just takes time, but how far do you think they could continue that? They just did 2 billion. What's preventing them from doing another 2 or 4 or 20?
DJT or anybody specifically?
Well, anybody, but in particular DGT.
Well, the key resistance for them will be how much money do they have, right? And so, how much money do they have? How much money can they raise? How much money can they access via debt, equity markets, et cetera? But that's always going to be the limiter. Obviously, what their appetite will be for it as well. But I think the race for Bitcoin is on, and obviously, Saylor sort of started that race, and everybody's trying to catch up. And so, I think for the people that get it, apparently DJT does. I think that there's probably an insatiable demand for it. So the limiter is going to be their ability to raise money. I don't really know what their full plan is. I don't think they've fully released that yet. I think going back to the bigger narrative of the Bitcoin treasury companies, there's really three different types of Bitcoin treasury companies, in my opinion. And each one has their own dynamics as to how they'll be able to raise the money and acquire the Bitcoin. And so sort of seeing where DJT Media fits into those three could sort of give us an idea, but I haven't seen that yet.
What do you think, Natalie?
I'd love.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone buys as much Bitcoin at any given moment that they can in that moment. I mean, certainly, now being on the board of Semler, like the goal is whenever we can buy Bitcoin, we want to stack more. Eric Semler, who's the executive chairman, he's put it out there publicly that he wants to be a Bitcoin powerhouse with the company. And so it's really about finding ways to accumulate. That's one of the reasons why they just recently brought on Joe Burnett as director of Bitcoin strategy. And now we have Nick Coletta for the treasurer. And so it's just a really interesting time because to Mark's point, there is this race. It's like, how much can you accumulate? Can you do it in ways that are very creative? Can you share the narrative in a way? Because the investor community really matters. It's like people have said, digital transformation of investor relations. What the community thinks really does matter. And I think, if you have a strong core operating business, that could also be a benefit, especially if Bitcoin takes a downturn. And so that's one thing that, I think will be a great way to set Semler apart. I'm obviously tracking the other Bitcoin treasury companies as well, because Michael Saylor opened up this playbook and now it seems like there's one launching and announcing every single week. The announcement made by by Adam Back, it's going to be like 30,000 Bitcoin in that treasury, and it already puts it in like the top 5. I mean, it's crazy. What are we going to see next? And like, Dylan was on my show a couple weeks ago. He's obviously well known for being the director of Bitcoin strategy at MetaPlanet. And he says it makes news now because Bitcoin is so foreign to so many people in the TradFi world, especially on the balance sheet and within the capital markets and issuing these Bitcoin backed credit securities that Michael has. But in the future, it's like every company becomes an internet company. Every company is going to become a Bitcoin company. But I think that companies that adopt Bitcoin early will definitely be able to garner such a premium. Some of them will probably be gobbled up by other companies that don't want to buy the Bitcoin themselves. They'll just acquire the company. There's speculation about, what if like the United States could purchase one of these companies? I mean, it's just fascinating, the speculation that's out there. And obviously Bitcoin treasuries it's going to be a huge narrative going forward.
Yeah, I would agree with Natalie 100%. And I'm old enough to have started investing into the internet stocks. My roommate had quit his job and we were day trading these things called internet stocks, and people thought we were weirdos talking about them the way that we talked about cryptocurrencies in 2016 and 2017. And of course, today there's no such thing as internet companies, right? So sort of the same thing. And just like there won't be anything, such thing as crypto companies or Bitcoin companies in the future, they'll just all be that. But what I had sort of alluded to earlier was what I see as three different types of companies that have emerged. And so really you have number one, which is sort of where Natalie ended, which is every company will buy Bitcoin. Everybody will buy it. Everyone needs to, right? Over a long enough time period, we believe they all will. And so you have the Teslas, for example, that are taking a percentage of their treasury and allocating it towards Bitcoin. And so we don't know where DJT fits in. Are they going to have a balanced portfolio and put 50% towards Bitcoin? Or are they going to be psychopaths and go 100% right all in? So we don't know that answer yet. So there's level one, which is like, I'm Tesla. I put some of my treasury into Bitcoin. Level two is then you have like a similar, is kind of like a perfect example of that, where I have this business, right? I have this medical business, and we're using that business to then get as much Bitcoin as we can. So we're running a treasury play, and we're running a business at the same time. That's level two, or type two. And then type three is the pure play model. And the pure play model is sort of strategy, although they do have the software business. It's kind of fallen into the background. It's inconsequential to their overall business at this point. And these pure play models of Metaplanet, for example, as well, where the model is to just acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. And their underlying business is to create Bitcoin-backed financial products. And I would sort of think of them more like a BlackRock, where now we are creating and selling to the market Bitcoin-backed equity and credit instruments. And that's the business model. And so those are the three levels that I see. And sort of each one sort of determines what your path will be to acquire Bitcoin. So like in a type two, like a similar type, you have the underlying business, as Natalie said, it creates cash flow that can go to more Bitcoin, which is great. But it also might require cash flow to run the business as well, right? Versus being just 100% focused on getting Bitcoin. And so we'll see how all this plays out. It's certainly interesting.
Well, and in that hierarchy, companies are going to be moving up, right? Like the goal for a lot of them is to be able to get to the level of issuing these preferreds that Saylor has trailblazed with Strike, Strife, and Stride. And you just have to get to a certain level of liquidity and trading volume. And so these companies are going to be in a race to get there. And I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah. So the pure play, right? So you have to get a big enough size. You have to be credit worthy, right, in the eyes of the market, obviously, to buy into those preferred shares. Preferreds. Natalie, I don't know if you saw the news, but I have just taken a role as the chief Bitcoin strategist for Satsuma, which is a new pure play Bitcoin treasury company in London, in the UK, an LSE listed. So the London Stock Exchange, we will be the biggest in the market. We're coming out with a really, really, really big splash. But it's a pure play model. And so, we spend a lot of time thinking about how big do we need to be? What does our asset base need to be so we can sell? And the reason why I'm getting confused is in the UK, they're called preference shares, not preferreds. How much assets do we need to have to sell the preference shares at what coverage ratio? And then what does it take to continue to grow that credit worthiness all the way to the point where we can get rated instruments. And so, it's a race.
Mark, I have a question for you about that. It's something I've been thinking about a lot when I've had this conversation with investors trying to figure out like who's the winner, right? Obviously, strategy is the winner, and that they have the largest treasury of anyone, right? Like they're going to probably keep ahead of the rest of the world for the time being because they got 10 times more than the second, right? But what do you think is going to be the trade-offs of the, let's say, smaller fish, but in the smaller ponds, right? So you're involved with UK's dominant treasury company, right? The Metaplanet is like the dominant one in Japan. So how do you see these different treasury companies becoming kind of like the monopolies of the different kinds of paper and credit issued in each given market, right? Obviously, they're not, Michael Saylor's talked about this, I think, on your show, Natalie, about how Metaplanet's not really in competition with strategy because they have the Japanese market, right, where Michael can't issue to that market directly. So how do you think that dynamic is going to unfold over the next 12 to 24 months as investors decide not only which treasury company, but which country to be exposed to?
Yeah, I don't look at it under that frame at all. I think that's sort of a wrong frame to look at. Status is a zero-sum game. Wealth is not. Right. So the more wealth that's created, the more wealth that's created. And so certainly, as we're all Bitcoiners and we want to get as much Bitcoin as we can, certainly one company is going to have the most Bitcoin, certainly. And it looks like Strategy is going to win that race. And I don't think anyone's going to get more Bitcoin than Strategy has. So if you consider who has the most Bitcoin winning, but if I have a $10 billion company that's growing at 50%, whether I'm the number one or the number 12 position or the number 62 position, I have a $10 billion company growing at 50%. That's winning to me, right? And so I just look at winning a little bit differently. I think there can be hundreds, I think there could potentially be thousands of these companies across the world doing extremely well. When I say extremely well, doing probably better than any company listed in the NASDAQ or S&P 500 right now. So I think there can be hundreds or thousands of these. And the reason why is if you look at, as Natalie said, sort of that race to the hierarchy, if the ultimate race is to build up an asset base that I can sell financial instruments off of, each instrument's going to be a little bit different, right? And so each one will be like a little bit of a different flavor, a little bit of a different risk profile, credit profile, sort of like all the ETFs that we have today. In the US, we have 3,900 ETFs, 3,900 just in the US alone. We're not talking about global ETFs, right? So we have 4,000 ETFs, 10,000 stocks. So how many financial instruments do we have? Unlimited. Not to count all the publicly traded companies also have bonds that are being bought and sold in the market as well. Government bonds, municipal bonds, corporate bonds, junk bonds. I mean, we have tens and tens of thousands of financial products. And if you look at where I think this is going, we are creating new financial instruments backed by Bitcoin. So how many of those can we have? Tens of thousands.
Yeah, I agree. And just to add to that, I mean, the 3,000 ETFs, they're not all buying Bitcoin, but in this case, all the Bitcoin treasuries are buying Bitcoin. Yeah. Every time you buy, it benefits me. And to the risk aspect that Mark brought up, I think what's interesting too is this is where people as active investors can kind of make some interesting decisions over the years because yes, there are some dominant players, but the bigger you are, actually, Michael Saylor said this in one of his recent interviews, it's harder to 10x from there or 100x. Like the bigger you are, your growth sort of starts to slow down. And we're seeing that in the CAGR of Bitcoin. But if you're one of these smaller companies, you actually have the potential to 10x, 100x, 1000x. So I think that's where you decide kind of what is your risk tolerance. It'll be interesting to see what these companies do. And 10 years from now, I think a lot of them will be Bitcoin banks. You will be able to access financial services and really make use out of your Bitcoin in a way that it is intended to be as pristine collateral. And I think that'll be an interesting world to see as well.
What do you think are the most
Natalie and Mark
metrics? Oh, go ahead, Angelo.
No, I'm just really quickly was wondering, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like that level 3 company that you're talking about, Mark, it as kind of table stakes for working, for even functioning, it depends upon a multiple of MNAV, right? Like the value of the company has to be more than the value of its Bitcoin holdings. First of all, let me stop there and see, do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? And if so, how does that affect Luke's question about the winning and losing? Does that make sense?
So I don't think that's necessarily the case. So
okay,
first of all, you're talking about the MNAV. So that's the multiple just for the audience, right? That's the multiple to the net asset value of the Bitcoin that they hold. It's very similar to looking at a company based off its book value. So in the TradFi world,
book value versus cap.
Yeah. Right. But traditional stocks don't trade as a multiple to their book value. They trade as a multiple to their earnings, the future earnings, right? Discounted cash flows, price to earnings ratios, et cetera, right? So with Tesla right now, it's hovering somewhere in the 150 years of income to cover what you pay today. Because, right, markets are forward-looking. They're discounting mechanisms. So I'm trying to buy something cheaper today than I think it will be worth in the future. So I can buy Tesla at it's going to take 150 years of income, discounted cash flows, to get to where it's at. Palantir is like over 500. So they're not trading a book value. They're right. So banks maybe. So I think first of all, the MNAV is a metric that Bitcoiners look at, trying to understand, will the company outperform Bitcoin? But TradFi doesn't ask that question. TradFi doesn't even, most of them believe in Bitcoin. They want to know, will it beat inflation? They want to know if it'll beat the S&P 500. So first of all, I think the MNAV is a metric that Bitcoiners use, and we'll grow past that. But to the second part of the question, which is, do they have to trade at a multiple, I think a positive multiple to MNAV to be able to do the financial products, I think is what you asked. And I would say
Yes.
no. I would say no, because what they're doing is, what Saylor is doing, let's just say, he's really the only one doing this so far, is selling these preferreds, right? So they're credit and debt instruments, backed by the Bitcoin that they have. Now, it's not technically collateral. It's called coverage, which is a little bit different, but it's the credit worthiness of MicroStrategy itself. So, for example, you can have the preferreds selling at a 2 or 3 times coverage, the seniors trading at a 5 times coverage, and the juniors trading at a 5 or 10 times coverage. So really, it's, do I have enough coverage to sell the credit worthiness of the asset I want to sell into the market? So regardless of where that's trading on an MNAV, does that make sense?
But Mark, I
It
have
does.
a question about that though, because if the MNAV falls below 1, why wouldn't I understand the products, the STRK, all that stuff still is in existence because they're offering something that no one can get anywhere else. But the actual at the market equities sales and purchases, if it goes below 1, wouldn't you just buy Bitcoin?
So first of all, we should all just buy Bitcoin.
Yes.
These are, I put out a post on Twitter that went super viral. And as someone who's running strategy for a Bitcoin company, I shouldn't be saying this, but I said, look, these treasury companies are not for Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners should buy Bitcoin and put it in cold storage. This is not a replacement for that. 97% of institutional capital today, we're talking over $400 trillion, cannot buy commodities. They can't. They can't buy Bitcoin. So it's easy for us as Bitcoiners, why don't they just sell it and buy Bitcoin? Sure,
Right.
but that's just not how the world works, okay? So we as Bitcoiners should buy Bitcoin, but 97% of institutional capital cannot buy commodities. They can buy equities and they can buy credit, and that's it. So again, Bitcoiners are looking at the MNAV and going, will this outperform Bitcoin? I think a good run company should at least do a 2 or 3x MNAV over Bitcoin because of the leverage that they provide into the market. Now, some might trade for less, and then as Natalie said earlier, these will probably be ripe for M&A takeovers where, hey, I'll give you some of my equity, I'll take over your Bitcoin. But number one, I think they should be trading over. But I think the next part is, again, trying to understand what they're doing. So they should be trading at a premium. And you mentioned in that question was MicroStrategy selling their stock into the market. Yes, they're doing that, but the ultimate goal is not to sell MicroStrategy stock at the market. It's to sell Strike, Strive, and Strive. They haven't got enough volume there, so they are still, we saw, I think it was the announcement that came through today, they still did sell a pretty big chunk of MSTR stock at the market. But I think the goal is to sell the preferreds. And Saylor himself has said, right, like even if the MNAV dropped below 1, David Bailey got a lot of heat on X for saying that if MNAV dropped below 1, they would sell Bitcoin to buy the stock back. I don't think he really meant that. I think, and Saylor, what Saylor said is if MNAV were to drop below 1, I would sell the preferreds at the market and buy my stock back, not sell the Bitcoin. The goal is to increase the Bitcoin, not sell the Bitcoin. I think that'd be catastrophic. We sell the preferreds. But yes, as Natalie rightly said, there's this sort of hierarchy that you have to get to. You have to get to a big enough company. And this is why I think a lot of the metrics, and again, the Bitcoiners are looking at it the wrong way. A lot of the metrics they look at are a little bit wrong or misleading. So there was a new metric put out this last week called PBID. And it shows how fast a company is acquiring Bitcoin. So the rate at which I'm acquiring Bitcoin is my yield. If I went from 1 Bitcoin to 2 Bitcoin, I have 100% yield. Well, MicroStrategy's only had a 20% yield this year. Yeah, but we did 100%. Yeah, but you have 2. And so in this case, and a lot of people are overlooking this when it comes to MicroStrategy, size matters. Right? Size matters. Like MicroStrategy is buying more Bitcoin in one day than Metaplanet's acquired over its entire existence. And so I think looking at just the yield and just the MNAV is a little bit misleading when I'm trying to look at the potential future valuation of a company.
I fully agree with that. Mark, is something I've been talking to a lot of my clients or just people in general about is that these companies, they don't have like a silver bullet, right? They're not offering one security or one credit instrument, and that's going to magically get them to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Bitcoin, right? You're buying the engineering of the total company. And so as we evaluate it, we shouldn't just be saying, oh, MSTR is lower risk than what you named, Metaplanet as an example. Like I think a lot of people in Bitcoin, because this is so new, are wanting to have a silver bullet like, oh, MNAP is the magic thing, and that is in of itself determining risk. Well, I don't necessarily, I agree with you. I don't think that's the case, right? Metaplanet at a 3x, they have to go from 16, 17,000 coins to whatever, 45 or 50,000 coins. Whereas MSTR strategy has to get to a million, right? So it's like, sure, one can say Metaplanet is quote unquote higher risk because the MNAV is 50% higher than MSTR. But what's more likely to happen? Metaplanet getting to 50,000 coins or Michael getting to a million, or at this point, 1.25 million coins? I mean,
let me put it another way. I'm trying to work on my own set of metrics I'm going to release into the market, but let's put it another way. I spoke at Bitcoin Prague just recently, and I got to have dinner with Michael Saylor, and he said the conversation always comes up, and some lady asked him, what's the unforeseen risk that you don't see? Like, what could happen, right? And he said, what's the worst that could happen? I never am able to raise another dollar. And so I have a 70, now it's, I think, $100 billion company growing at 50% a year.
What a shame.
There's no public company that grows at 50% a year, much less a $100 billion company growing at 50% a year. So back to kind of the point that you made, Luke, about size matters, we sort of have to look at, again, the future valuation. So sure, Metaplanet, smarter web company, whatever, they're growing way faster, sure. But when you own 600,000 Bitcoin, my price target for Bitcoin in 2030 is 1 million. When you have 600,000 Bitcoin worth 1 million, you're a lot more valuable company than a company that has 1,000 Bitcoin worth 1 million. And so we have to look at that potential future valuation.
Natalie, what has been your experience being at Similar? What has been something that you learned or something that has been surprising in your experience so far, being on the inside of a treasury company?
Yeah, I was so honored to be asked. It's one of those situations where it's like if someone gives you an opportunity, you gotta say yes and sometimes learn as you go, right? Sometimes you feel like the shoes are difficult to fill, but I've already had the chance to learn so much. And one of the reasons I accepted is just because I feel that Executive Chairman Eric Semler is such a visionary. First of all, his investment track record, if you look into his background and his capital management firm, I mean, he knows how to pick winners. And this is it's a legacy play for him. His father started this company and the goal was to really help people. The medical device products, they really battle a silent killer, which is peripheral arterial disease, and they're meant to detect that early to prevent something catastrophic from happening. And so he really embraces the idea of, tackling our chronic health issues in this country and sort of the Make America Healthy Again movement. And so that core business has really meant a lot to him, but he saw the vision. He was the first executive chairman after Michael Saylor to embrace the Bitcoin Treasury strategy. He was really that first US company after MicroStrategy to say, we're going to do this too. And so I really admire that bold move to say maybe the path is uncharted, but we're going to be part of the pioneers charting it. And it's just been a really, really great experience. I've had a lot of opportunity to learn more about the capital markets. Again, the goal is to accumulate as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Hopefully, eventually, $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. We're almost to 5,000, and I think that the team that he's accumulating is fantastic. He really cares about making sure that he's picking the right people that are going to drive this mission forward. And it is a mission. And, talking earlier about like whether these companies are competing, what I really think we're doing is we're competing with the bigger asset classes. We're competing with, the assets within, say, the credit market eventually, just like Stripe, Strike, and Stride are doing, because that is the massive pool of capital. You know, there's like 100 trillion in equities. Look at the bond market. Look at the fixed income market, how big that is to try to tackle that gorilla. And I think Bitcoin will, and it will revolutionize it. And I think it is repricing what has been such mispriced capital. And I think that's why it's so hard for TradFi to wrap their head around it, because they've been complacent in a system that's been so broken for so long. I mean, it's ludicrous that you're totally fine if you invest in a bunch of underwater treasuries because that's the safe and secure asset. But God forbid, you invest in Bitcoin because it's a little bit more volatile. So I think everything is changing, and I'm just so honored to be a part of it. And I think what a lot of the treasury companies are doing is really great.
I liked how you framed that, Natalie. Instead of competing against each other, we're competing against TradFi assets.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I had said earlier, where it's like the TradFi investor doesn't ask if the MNAV is going to beat Bitcoin. They ask if it's going to either beat the S&P 500 or inflation.
Yeah.
That's where we're competing against. And so big opportunity. Yeah. I would
Yep.
also like to say, I mean, I'm happy to keep talking about these intricacies, but I think it's important to not really take our eye off of the bigger picture here. And I see a lot of people on Bitcoin Twitter or X or whatever who are really negative about Bitcoin treasury companies, and there's some grift that's being run. They're calling it like paper Bitcoin summer, and these types of things, right? But I've been in the Bitcoin space for 10 years now, and I've been making content for a long time, and Natalie has a long time as well. And I'm sure Natalie and Luke, you would agree, probably maybe the most often asked question we've ever had is, how do we reach more people? How do we orange pill the world? Right? That's like the most asked question. And so I've been making videos, right? I've had 100 million views on my videos. And then, I'm trying to reach more people with the videos. And then for the last 5 years, I've been working with venture capital, and I'm trying to deploy capital into building products that can reach more people so we can advance the space forward. But one thing that I've seen after building products for that, like I believe that the best products, and really when the early majority comes into the product, is going to be when they don't know they're using the product. And so when we look at investing in the companies, we look at what the total addressable market is, of how much of an impact we can make with that product. And so when it comes back to Bitcoiners and trying to spread Bitcoin to the world, and really the reason why we want to spread Bitcoin to the world is because we understand the whole world doesn't understand, but the whole world is on this fiat melting ice cube situation, and their pensions, their future is at serious risk. They don't know this. Okay. But it is, we understand that. And so we make content trying to get them off the Titanic onto a lifeboat, or whatever analogy we want to use. But that is the biggest addressable market. We're talking about $400 trillion. We're talking about tens and tens. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people who are stuck in pensions in this fiat system that have no hope. And they don't even know it. They're not even aware of the problem, much less looking for a solution. So if we want to think about how do we bring this future, how do we help the most people? How do we orange pill the world? We orange pill the world by bringing Bitcoin to them in a way that they don't even know they're getting into Bitcoin. We save their pensions by wrapping Bitcoin into credit and debt instruments. And that is the largest addressable market that we're here for. And certainly in any market, there's people that are just along for the grift or the graft and try to make some quick bucks. But the companies like Semler, like what we're doing at Satsuma, like obviously what Strategy is doing, we're orange pilling the world. It's the biggest addressable market. And so I am super bullish on it, not from obviously the potential on the money side, using leverage to get more Bitcoin. I love that part. But I'm out here to help the world. And this is the way I see to do that.
I think that's well said. I want to piggyback off that because I saw this meme and I cracked up. I thought it was so funny. It was like, which way, Western man? And it was a grumpy cat. It was like righteous grumpiness versus paper Bitcoin summer. And it made me giggle. I think that a lot of the criticism, I do think it comes from a good place of just wanting to make sure that Bitcoin maintains its principles that are so rooted in integrity, right? Of fixing the financial system, of not making the same mistakes. And so I always want to give those people the benefit of the doubt. But to our earlier conversation about how every company is going to be a Bitcoin company, I mean, do you want to start excluding corporations from using the internet? It's a tool. It's going to be embraced by everyone. It's going to be inevitable. It's going to be used for good things. It's going to be used for bad things. But if you really embrace the principles of Bitcoin, which is free market capitalism and the ability for us to, take our future by the hold and actually own it and own our own money, then you have to be okay with it. And you can encourage, people to buy spot Bitcoin and self-custody it, which of course Mark and I both do.
Yeah.
But also I think that you can't stop companies from embracing it and innovating it, and governments are going to do so as well. Maybe not the UK right now, which is thinking about selling. But I just think this is the message, like Bitcoin is for everyone, and let the free market decide where the value really is.
Yeah. And I think it's, that's the right perspective to have. And so we should continue to create the education in the space to continue to push people to buy in Bitcoin and self-custody and those types of things. But it's just unrealistic to think that those hundreds of millions of people are just going to somehow get out of their 401k or mutual fund or whatever they have, their government pension, to buy Bitcoin. And so it's a way we can reach them. But I would also say, we saw the same reaction to politicians embracing Bitcoin. And now apparently all these Bitcoin grifters are now bowing down and begging politicians to come in. But that's just not how it works. We started with the cypherpunks and it's grown up, right? So it's from the bottom moving up. And the first thing I'd say is I did a panel with on this topic specifically. And in the early days when Bitcoin first started, on the mailing list, you had a dozen, maybe dozens of cypherpunks. Today, we have well over 10,000 cypherpunks working on coding, working on maintaining security and privacy and freedom and all of those ethos, as Natalie said. And it's grown up from there, right? And so it's for everybody. Everybody needs Bitcoin, but we have to understand it is also a one-way street. So we need Bitcoin. Corporations need Bitcoin. Governments need Bitcoin. But Bitcoin doesn't need governments. So it is a one-way street. Everybody needs it, but it doesn't depend on it. And so we can maintain those ethos and still push it forward.
I agree with all that. And I think that a lot of the mindset around this negativity or criticism, even if it comes from a good place, I think a lot of the criticism of the Treasury companies is in very much the same vein as criticism to the stable coins and the criticisms to, like, the politicians, in particular Donald Trump, buying billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. I had similar to you, Mark, not this year, but last year, Michael Saylor, myself, and the CEO of Tether, for those who don't know. Anyway, we all had this conversation about that negativity, right? Of people not, by people, I mean Bitcoiners, not liking that reality. And I think this is something Bitcoiners, it's kind of a tough pill to swallow. I think the Treasury companies are magnifying this discomfort, is that we got into Bitcoin because we don't like the central banks. But the reality is that Bitcoin, because it is the life raft that it is, I think Bitcoin is going to extend the life of the central bank by a very long time period, because it's going to be the best thing to help the central banks survive. It's going to be the best thing to help the corporate equity survive, right? If Saylor hadn't adopted Bitcoin, his equity would have collapsed, right? If we don't have a Bitcoin-backed dollar, the dollar is going to decline a lot faster than we're without it, right? So I think it's kind of a I'm agreeing to what you guys are both saying, and I think this additional component is something that Bitcoiners are kind of realizing, and they don't really want to verbalize, they don't really want to accept it, but that's the reality. Is that if you want to have global neutral money that helps everybody, you are going to help people that are not necessarily people you like. And Bitcoiners are happy to say that and tweet about it as much as they want until it's maybe the central banker or until it's the Wall Street guy that actually they're helping too. So Bitcoin really is for everybody, including those that even Bitcoiners themselves don't necessarily take too kindly to. Anyway, I think it's just a growing up, maturing process that we're having to do.
I think it's also it's the maturing process, but it's the process. And so while I'm sure all of us here are Ron Paul, disciples, and we'd love to end the Fed, the reality is if we shut the Fed down today, it would be disastrous.
War.
That's the reality,
Yeah.
right? And so certainly I think that Wall Street is a little bit unnecessary, and most of Wall Street could just go away. We could just buy Bitcoin. We don't have to deal with all those investments. But we can't do that today, right? And so we have to understand there's a process to getting to that, bright orange future that we all think about and dream about. And we have to go through the process. And so getting into these people, like I said, sort of earlier, kind of getting them off the ship onto the life rafts. We will get there. This is part of that process that we have to go through. And so I think maybe a lot of Bitcoiners came to Bitcoin because they're very, very idealistic. What's the word there? Anyway,
Idealistic.
Yeah. Okay. I said it right. But we can't lose sight that although that is our goal and that is our end destination that we're all working towards, there's that process that we go through. And so it does have to go through, the governments and through the corporations and through Wall Street to get there.
Do you think that the cycles maybe, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot, do you think the cycles maybe change as we have these market participants change? I mean, obviously, eventually they have to change. Like, you can't have it stay the same forever. But I'm really starting to wonder if Bitcoin, we just continue this chop consolidation of stair stepping up. I agree with your target of $1 million in the next 3 to 5 years, whatever, 2029, 2030 or so. And so I wonder, as Bitcoin matures and the law of large numbers enters, what if these treasury companies suck up all or a lot of the volatility on the upside? The 10x's, the 20x's in the course of a couple months, those become the treasury companies or otherwise Bitcoin companies or VC startups, right? And then maybe the bear markets are these MNAV compressions, or maybe just, we have a lot of companies that don't do this right. And I think to your point, Mark, I fully agree. Bitcoiners should focus on Bitcoin because all the treasury companies or Bitcoin companies in general today, like I think there's going to be way more in the next couple of years. I think most of them aren't going to do it right. They're not going to copy Michael Saylor. They're not going to copy Similar Scientific or Metaplanet or whatever, right? I think most of them are going to be zombies. I think most of them are going to, have trouble with the first go around, right? Mt. Gox FTX. They didn't, in the same way exchanges had to have lots of failures to show everyone what the path to success was. I'm expecting the same thing's going to be with Bitcoin companies or Wall Street getting involved with Bitcoin anyway. So I'm curious what both of you, Mark and Natalie, think about that. How do you think that this innovation and these actors, politicians, Wall Street, or otherwise, entering into Bitcoin change the market cycles for Bitcoin and Bitcoin adjacent assets?
Well, you're right. I mean, not every company's gonna do well, and I bet the ones that don't, they're gonna be Bitcoiners who are actually fiat maxis, right? And they're gonna be making the mistakes. I really love what Mark Moss always talks about with regards to time horizon, because in the Bitcoin space, everyone's obsessed with 4-year cycles. I have to be honest, I don't come from a finance background, and so all of that is just very new to me. Every financial chart I look at just looks like a heart monitor. I mean, it's up and down, whether it's CPI, price of an equity, this or that. I think we just need to zoom out. I mean, everything is going in the direction of more adoption. Yes, there is more volatility. That volatility is being used to benefit some of these companies as we build into more of a Bitcoin system. I really agree with everything Mark said earlier about how we're transitioning. We're in a period of transition. Bitcoin is the bridge. Thank goodness we have it, because it's you almost wonder, how did Bitcoin come just in time? Because we are at such an inflection point. And when I zoom out, the bigger cycle that I worry about is the long-term debt cycle, which you also talk about, Mark. I'm just praising all your work lately. This is a massive cycle. It's a turning point, just like other revolutions have been in the past, where a new technology took over and transformed our lives and transformed the economics of the entire system. And so really for me, I just think people need to zoom out. We're all so impatient. We want it to get to 1 million tomorrow. I personally think it's going to maybe go a little slower. Hopefully there's some massive catalyst where we go from gradually to suddenly, but it will take time. And hey, the longer that we're in these lower price, it's not even a low, we're in the 100K, right? And these more affordable cost basis ranges, you can acquire more Bitcoin, right? Than you can if it was 1 million tomorrow. So I just hope people zoom out and not worry so much about the day-to-day and the short-term cycles.
I love the term Natalie throughout, fiat maxis. There's 3 points I'd bring up in regards to that to answer that. But regarding the fiat maxis, anyone who's obsessing over the price and the cycle is a fiat maxi, right? Because they're constantly obsessed over what the fiat price of their Bitcoin is, as opposed to understanding that one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. Because I believe Bitcoin will be $1 million in 2030. I don't care what the price of Bitcoin is next week or next month or in 6 months from now. I don't care because I'm looking at a much longer time horizon. So their fiat maxis constantly comparing it to the price of fiat because they still judge their wealth based in fiat. So they're maxing on the fiat. I love that term, Natalie. Good job. What I'd say to that, and there's a couple things I'd say to that to answer your question there, Luke. So number one, you mentioned the problem with Bitcoin's price going up because of the size. So as the size gets bigger, it's harder for the price to go up. And that's common held belief.
Right.
I think we could see something different happen. And the reason why we could see something happen are two different reasons. So when you look at technology, which is what we're in a technology cycle. We're in a 50-year technological revolution cycle. It's happened. We're now on our 6th time. This cycle has repeated in the last 300 years. We can see that every single time there's 4 distinct phases that we go through. Now, when you try to measure technology adoption, we'll use something called an S curve. And so the S curve works, the time it takes to go from 0 to 10% adoption is the same time it takes to go from 10 to 90% adoption. So you have this parabolic part of the curve. So in the part that we're in right now, we're just entering the parabolic phase. So in that first phase, it was very volatile, going up and down a lot, where we saw the 80% drawdowns, the 70% drawdowns. But in the parabolic part of the S curve, we could just be running up, number one. Number two, Bitcoin is not like most assets. You see, what we typically compare that to is other stocks, other financial instruments. And those are typically started through like a venture capital framework and then adopted by institutions first. Then after the pre-IPO raise, they dump on the public, the retail, who tries to buy them later. But Bitcoin operated or has come into existence the opposite. So Bitcoin started with small retail checks. I started buying Bitcoin in 2015 when it was $300. Sounds amazing, right? Yeah, except for putting a couple $100 was risky back then, right? A couple $100 was risky. A couple $1,000, you're out of your mind, right? Today, you're writing, if you're Trump, $2 billion checks. $2 billion. So we started with small individual retail investors and grew to the size. But now we have the wall of money coming in. Now we have tens and hundreds of billions of dollars coming in. And so because it's operated the opposite, it was retail first. Now the big money's coming in. We could potentially see CAGR going back up because of the checks of sizes. So certainly the size could slow it down, but we've seen the size of the checks go up by orders of magnitude. So 2 reasons why I think potentially the CAGR could at least hold longer than most people think, if not potentially even accelerate for a while. To the other point that you had brought up about potentially these treasury companies creating some sort of a cascading effect, a risk event where we have this cascading sell-off event. The nature of the treasury business is sort of to use leverage to acquire more Bitcoin. So leverage can be dangerous. We also know human nature is to typically push things too far. So it certainly makes sense. It's certainly reasonable to think that there will be a lot of entrants that come into the space, as Natalie called them, fiat maxis, and they take on way too much risk and way too much debt, and they get themselves into a situation where the debt is due under some term. They can't pay it back. They have to start selling the Bitcoin, and that puts them into like this debt spiral. That's certainly possible, and it's probable. I don't think it's the case yet. I haven't really seen that. I haven't seen any companies that are getting themselves into those situations today. Saylor has set this model for us, and so most people are drafting off of that model. I know us at Satsuma as head of Bitcoin strategy. I'm like, hey, we don't need to pretend we're smarter than Saylor. Like, let's just do what works right now. We'll innovate later, right? And so most people are sort of copying that model, and so we're seeing debt and leverage staying really, really low. And what I think for most of the Bitcoin treasury companies that are popping up, they understand that one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. So even for people to think about what happens in the bear market, that's the question that everybody's asking. But what happens to these in the bear market? You're a fiat maxi. Because what bear market? If one Bitcoin's one Bitcoin, what are you talking about? What's a bear market to me? And so I think most of these companies, if their board and customer base and investors are aligned, they hold the Bitcoin. And there is no forcing function. Again, some companies will probably take too much leverage and risk, and that will happen. As Natalie, I believe, rightly pointed out earlier, we can see a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening in that space. I know with another treasury company I was working with before, they're already working on that, using equity to acquire companies to liquidate and get more Bitcoin. And so we'll see that. But I think those are a couple of reasons why we may not see the big drawdown. Now, certainly there's volatility. I'm not saying the price never dips. Of course it's going to. But I do think there's a real chance we don't see the giant drawdowns of the past.
I agree with you. I agree with that. I think that it's something else a lot of people ask, and this gets back to an earlier point you made, Mark, about how do we orange pill the world? I think a lot of people, myself included, have been more or less frustrated or at least surprised that the texts haven't necessarily started rolling in asking about Bitcoin. They did recently with the XRP little pump on its, trend towards zero, right?
They were asking you about XRP?
Well, yeah, it's still, it comes through. And it's amazing to me, all these years later, XRP's down, whatever, 90-95%.
I was on a trip. I was on a trip last week. I do a fundraiser for this orphanage. It was a dirt bike trip. And a few people on the trip were asking about XRP.
Not crazy.
It popped a little bit. And right. They weren't asking about Bitcoin. They're asking about XRP. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. And my thought there, and XRP, the little pump kind of made me think of this again, but my thought there is that I fully agree with you, Mark. I think that the treasury companies are going to, with their intelligent leverage and intelligent strategy, are going to kind of dampen out that volatility of Bitcoin. I think a lot of the retail people that haven't yet come back into Bitcoin yet, think it's too expensive because they have anchoring bias, unit bias, or whatever. And so I think that what the treasury companies are going to do in a way is they're going to siphon that retail euphoria. They're going to take that. They're going to get high premiums, and they're going to be able to convert those premiums into Bitcoin. But they'll be able to hold or hodl the Bitcoin for longer than what many of their, equity investors are going to do, right? So anyway, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this dynamic is going to play out, because I agree with you as well, Mark, that I think that the CAGR is probably going to continue because price is set at the margin. And if we have all this demand coming in, whether it's from institutions when valuations for the treasury companies are lower, or if it's from the retail when there's more of a temporary bubble or euphoria or excitement, I mean, I think that's the beauty of what Michael Saylor has done and led the charge with, is that no matter if, my point being that for all of Bitcoin's history, number has only gone up when there's been retail euphoria panic, right? Like you were saying, Mark, retail front run Wall Street or institutions in Bitcoin's case. And so now that it's entering Wall Street, the whole engineering of the credit markets maybe is to take out the extremes or prepare for the extremes of both. And in that case, then I think that Bitcoin is just, I think it's just going to keep going up. I even wonder anymore if we're going to have those major 80-70% drawdowns. But again, to your point, Mark, that's fiat maxi talk, right? If one zooms out to a 16-year time horizon instead of a 4-year time horizon, there is no bear market. It's just a line that keeps going up with temporary little wiggles, with temporary little heartbeats, like Natalie said. So, yeah, fascinating. What do you guys think about beyond the number on the screen as far as living life, right? Obviously, we have Jeff and Angela here, and this is something that all of us are going to be at Camp Nakamoto. So whether it's about that event specifically, I think it'd be great to talk about that, what we're looking forward to, but also just in general, all 5 of us, but in particular, Mark, Natalie, myself, I've been very fortunate to travel to a lot of the Bitcoin conferences in person. So I'm curious, for all of us, but in particular for Mark and Natalie, why do you keep going to the in real life events, right? Like why go and meet people one-on-one when instead you can just make another podcast? It's going to reach 1,000 people or 10,000 people, right? What is the special connection, or what's so precious about this time in Bitcoin that keeps you wanting to go out and meet more people in real life?
I think there's just nothing like an in-person connection. And sometimes I wish these conferences would, do away with all the panels, because to your point, we could watch those online, and I just want to hang out with other Bitcoiners because it's so much fun. I've made lifelong friends. I have the best mentors in the world. And I've talked about this on my show before, but Bitcoin has reignited a sense of hope in the future for me. And I feel like I relate to so many people who are on the fringe. They're looking in, they're skeptical, they're just not ready to dip their toe in the water. And I get it, because I was there. I didn't understand what was wrong. I knew there was a problem in the system. I was feeling frustrated, and I felt like I wasn't empowered economically, and I didn't know if I could afford a family and a house and all these things. But like so many people, you're like, do I blame the politician? It must be a political thing, the corporate greed, blah, blah, blah. You just, you get taken down all these narratives when you should really just examine the root of the whole entire system, which is our money. That's like the lifeblood of the economy. And none of us take a second look to even question inflation and why prices have to go up and why our whole system is based on credit. And so that's why I think education is so important. And we have to continue to meet people where they are. I'm about to share an interview with the girl who went viral for her USC tweet. I don't know if you guys saw that. Halston is her name. She was phenomenal. And now she's so passionate about orange pilling Gen Z and how badly her generation needs it, because so many of them graduate, they pay all this money for college, and they have no hope of making it with any of their jobs. And they're looking out and they're feeling like, well, I'm just gonna, be on TikTok or whatever. And it does, like, fiat leads you to all this short-term thinking, short-term decision making. And so I think that this is the most amazing movement to be a part of, because it's so positive in every single way, to allow people to feel not only empowered to pursue their dreams, start their companies, start their families, but just how that will make us more cooperative as a whole and allow us to create more value for one another, because fiat just extracts from us, and we feel like we're on this endless rat race. And so I just feel a lot of hope for the future. I love the people that I've met, even the grumpy ones about paper Bitcoin summer. And I just can't wait.
I did see that tweet. I remember it was amazing. Well, what a good perspective for us to remember, to answer the question, Luke, I would say the reason why I continue to go to events is I try to go to any event that Natalie's going to be at, because as she said, we've made so many good lifelong friends, and I love being around Natalie, and if she's going to be there, or other people that we've met and made friends with along the way. And I would say that I think most people misunderstand what wealth is and how we acquire wealth. And I think most people think about making more money, like trying to make more money, achieve wealth that way, capital. But I think there's three types of capital, and I think that money is a byproduct of the other two. So everyone's trying to chase money, make money, and that's the wrong approach. If we build up our relationship capital and our mental capital, then the financial capital comes. And the only way that you can build up the relationship capital is to go build relationships. You have to go out in person. Zooms are great, Luke. And what's funny is so many times, I'm sure all of you have experienced this, but I do these Zoom interviews and then I see the person for the first time in real life, but I feel like I don't remember it's our first time, because I feel like I get to know them. So they're great, but they're no replacement for the in real life, conversations that you have and being around other people in the conversations. And so I think it's really important to build those relationships first. Experience being around in different environments and the spontaneous conversations that happen, and really build that. And then there's also the mental capital side. And what happens is, again, you can watch all the videos, but going there and being in those relationships and being there in real time and discussing those things, you learn so much more. And the reason why that's important is that you can't borrow somebody's conviction. You can only build your own conviction. And when I talk to people about Bitcoin, they say, well, I haven't really studied that much. I don't have that much time to put into it. And I understand that, right? There's a lot of demands for our time today. But the problem is that if you don't get your own conviction, you miss out on, a once in 1,000-year opportunity. And so the way that you build that conviction is, of course, through education. And Natalie talked about that. It's why it's so important. But being around other people who have conviction, being around the right type of people. We joke about it in the Bitcoin space, like the normies who don't get it, right? So being around those people who do get it, being around people who do see the problem and understand the solutions to the problem and do understand Bitcoin from different nuanced ways. And having those conversations allows me to not just get the education, which I can get from a book, but to really build that conviction. And so the skills, the conviction I build, plus the relationships, then will equal my return, my capital return. And I think that's how we get success.
And
Very, very well said, Mark.
time is also a form of capital, and it's very scarce. And we don't know how much of that type of currency we have left. So
it's the most
good to
scarce.
spend it with the other Bitcoiners that have similar values.
Can I interject one quick thing? So when I'm orange pilling people, I explain to them, you know, I don't want you to just go buy. Maybe it's the only asset I would say just go buy and learn about it later. I said, but dip your toe in the water. I said, but forget about number go up technology. Understanding Bitcoin is going to change your life and your soul. So I say, don't cheat yourself and just buy it and not pay attention to it. Research and understand Bitcoin, and it'll completely change your life for the better.
Yeah.
I fully agree with all that. I fully agree with all that. And I'm on the younger side of the spectrum of I guess just investors in general or Bitcoiners, right? So I feel very fortunate that I've been able to be around a lot of people. Everyone in this call, a lot of the people that are my subscribers or followers, a lot of people I look up to. It's very nice to be around people that have the same kind of mindset, because I know that in my previous lines of work, and probably for many people watching this, and especially if they were in like corporate America or something like that, having people that just understand everything like we've been saying. It's one thing for an individual to believe what we're saying, that, oh, time's more precious than money and relationships and all that, but to be friends with people that also not just say those things, but actually live and act those things out because they genuinely hold them to be true. That is such a, for me, like a life upgrade, and it means so much to me, that Bitcoiners are able to do that. And my hope is that as Bitcoin infects the world more and more, that more people can have this kind of non-zero sum mindset, and think beyond just numbers on a screen on its own. So as you wrap up here, I know that we all got to go here. But as you wrap up, I'd like to, tie this all in a bow and talk a little bit about Camp Nakamoto, right? Because obviously, literally everybody watching the show has watched at least one Bitcoin podcast before, and in many cases, probably literally hundreds of hours of Bitcoin podcasts before. So, like you're saying, Mark, a lot of people have done that. A lot of people, that subset, have gone to a Bitcoin conference before. Maybe they've gone to some city that has, some convention center or hotel room or whatever. Maybe they've even met, a few of us, right? Maybe they've, met Natalie or Mark or myself for a couple minutes or whatever, and that's all great. But at the end of the day, Camp Nakamoto is entirely different in that it's a whole retreat, it's a whole experience, right? It's like a whole 3-day thing, and outdoors and nature and all that. So Jeff, Angel, I don't know if you guys want to add anything about what us three can expect, as well as everybody watching, what they all can expect. But would definitely love that if you could.
I'll let Angelo go first because he's the director of the camp. So you can hear it right from the horse's mouth.
Thanks, Jeff. And so as you guys have been talking, my background has been changing because I'm at camp dealing with camp stuff, trying to find Wi-Fi that works. I was in the dining hall earlier. Now I'm back outside. Then my battery was dying, so sorry about that. But I mean, you guys touched on all of it already. Like the way this event even just came to be. I found Bitcoin in 2020. My life from 2020 till 2024 was last year, I think, was the first time you and I met, Jeff. And for those 4 years, my first 4 years in Bitcoin, I never met another Bitcoiner in real life. It was 100% online learning, reading videos, watching you, Natalie, watching you, Mark, and other people as well, of course. The story I tell is that I was going to drive my wife and my son absolutely crazy if I didn't meet somebody in real life for
Yeah.
Bitcoin. And so they forced me out of the house. They made me go find a meetup, and I found Jeff's meetup, Mass Adoption. And boy, it was, you know, it was something to now be in real life with people who shared this vision of the future and shared um, the values of Bitcoin. And it didn't take long after the conversation of that to start talking about, could we do something here at camp? And so I'm here right now. I'm on Sandy Island in the middle of Lake Winnipesaukee. Another story I tell is there's three things I love in this world: my family, this camp, and Bitcoin. And so bringing those three things together. And this camp is a family camp, and I really hope that everybody who's considering coming thinks about coming with their families, um, because this is intended to be, I think the phrase you use, Jeff, is a Bitcoin lifestyle experience.
Correct.
Um, all of the other aspects of a lifestyle that surround what it means to be freedom loving, what it means to be a Bitcoiner, are what we want to celebrate here. So sure, we want to talk about Bitcoin, we want to talk about the numbers, we want to talk about treasury companies and everything that goes into that process that you were describing earlier, Mark. Um, I tend to be an impatient guy. I was really listening in when you were saying, hey, there's a process to get from where we are to where we want to be. Um, the This is a good place for a guy like me who's impatient, and hopefully other people out there, to just get together with other Bitcoiners and as one of my colleagues here says, enjoy the journey itself. So that's what camp means to me.
My perspective was, we at Mass Adoption, we started out with a Freedom Festival, and I guess maybe 2022. We were lucky enough to have guys like Greg Foss, Larry Lepard, David Foley. We had support from everyone. They came, they spoke. I mean, it was a hodgepodge. We had no idea what we were doing, but we put it on in Boston. We sold tickets. Uh, but we did another one last year, and I kept on hearing from people. You go to nothing wrong with Bitcoin Magazine's conference, but you're shuffling around, and you don't really speak with people. And I'm like, what? I think by the time next year rolls around, which is coming up, I think Bitcoin will mature enough where people, the Bitcoiners, want to actually hang out with other Bitcoiners and live a Bitcoin lifestyle. So for 3 nights and 4 days, everything is Bitcoin, from the food, clean food, regenerative cow, like everything's clean, no GMOs. So the food is going to be pristine. We're getting great wine from Justin, from Ben Justman, Peony Lane. So everything is Bitcoin. And I run a monthly meetup, and quarterly we do a speaker series and we do events. And I've made amazing friends throughout these last 5 years. I'm so grateful for that. Um, but I'm thinking, let's build upon that. If that's so meaningful to me and to other people, let's have them spend 3 nights, 4 days together and just eat meals together. Take a shower next to, not, I don't mean it like that, but like just do your daily things. Um, you can edit that out, Luke.
No,
Uh,
it's great. It's funny.
but
Let's
you
all
know what I
go.
mean. So like, because I mean, you're gonna be like, holy shit, I bumped into Mark at the mess hall, and I can't believe the conversation I had with him about the eggs, whatever. So I just think this is the next progression of Bitcoin events. Um, and I think there's a place in the Bitcoin uh, app ecosystem to have events like this. And I think events like this are starting to grow. I'm seeing a few of these other type of events similar to this. So I just encourage people to really think about what life is all about. It's not about looking at a screen. It's not watching a number go up. It's about the bonds and the memories that you create. And that to me is wealth.
Well, that's great. I'll let Natalie close this out because I'm much more simple. Um, I heard there's a tennis court there, and I started playing tennis about a year and a half ago, and I really like it, and I'm looking forward to playing all the Bitcoiners in tennis.
Well,
You're on, Mark. It's a
Maybe
nice
we'll,
clay cart, but go ahead, Natalie.
maybe,
Sorry.
maybe we'll have to have a tournament and bet some sats on it.
I'm glad that you said what you did about screens. I think we should all put our screens down a little bit more and really have face-to-face contact and contact with the outdoors, contact with grass, see the sun, nature, all of it is so, so healing. A lot of us we tweet about Bitcoin, but that's not everything, right? We got to get to know people's families, their backgrounds. That was one of the reasons why I started my show. It was like every podcast was the same. It was just about like the charts and the money and the I was like, who is this person? Where did they come from? Like, what did they do? What did they want to be when they grew up? I just love meeting people and meeting their family members, their wives, their kids. Like everyone has such an interesting story, and it's really beautiful to come together.
Well, thank you very much. So appreciate everyone's time for being here. Love the conversation. And as we've been saying the last few minutes, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation next time in person. So for anyone watching, if you want to join us and like a dozen other awesome speakers, plus 100 people that you don't know from the virtual podcast, but I'm telling you, are also wonderful people, right? That's the other thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but as awesome as Mark, Natalie, and and Jeff, Angelo, as awesome as we all are, right? It's like everyone else that isn't on the camera that are the Bitcoiners, right? It's like they're just as awesome of people, right? And they don't necessarily get the quote unquote screen time or the attention. But
I, I,
every hodler has a unique story, and everyone at this camp is going to be really, really fun.
Luke, can I add one thing? I think
Go
it's
for
very
it.
important because it's a private island and because we have like our staff, our people on our team and all the speakers, we're only selling 100 tickets to the public. And we've already sold over half of them. So this is not a sales pitch. This is just an informational kind of blurb about there's only 40 something tickets left. So when they're gone, they're gone. Just like when the 21 million are mined, there's no more. Same thing with our
yeah.
tickets. When 44 or 5 more sell, it's done. So I highly recommend people jumping on the opportunity earlier than later.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I got to jump in on what you just said too, Luke, because your point about all the people buying the tickets. I'm actually the guy, as those tickets get sold, who reaches out to them to talk about the housing, what the cabins are like, the fact that, this is a rustic camp. So I don't want any surprises. So every ticket that gets sold, I reach out, I end up having a little email conversation back and forth with the people about what they can expect and so forth. And I am just blown away by the quality of the human beings who are buying these tickets and who are coming um, from all over the country, all over the world. Even we've sold
Yep.
some tickets to people in the UK,
Yeah.
down in Texas, all around New England, um, homeschoolers, new Bitcoiners, old Bitcoiners. It's just I'm really excited. It's going to be a very high quality group of humans with a lot of signal at this event. So I just had to jump in on that, Luke.
Well, thank you for doing so. Well, thank you everybody for your time, and looking forward to next time. Everyone, check out joining us at the event. If you can't make it this year, no problem. You'll miss out on going to the first annual Camp Nakamoto, but hopefully we'll see you one of these times. So thank you everyone for joining our discussion today.